as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne.
Right along here with Ransom Godwin tonight. What can we expect for the rest of 2024 is more the question. The first month has passed and it has been a barn burner, as they would say in the old days. A lot of things have transpired so quickly. Now, what comes next? As you know, I was doing a lot of research over in Europe, looking in the old museums and finding an enormous amount of data on a cyclical high tide pattern accompanied with the four gas giants that are lining up in October of 2024 like they will once again in this 2,000-year pattern. I've definitely seen some reset cycles within the paintings, post-reset, pre-reset, but there are definitely messages everywhere if you are looking, but most people aren't. But I was just lucky enough to be in Europe when the farmers' strikes had started. And you know what? They have ramped up to, epic proportions. The farmers unanimously across Europe are going to shut the continent down because they passed a bill to send $54 billion more over to the Ukraine or the Ukraine. Yet the farmers, they keep wanting to milk them for an extra 5 cents, 10 cents, 20 cents, $2, extra nitrogen taxes, CO2 tax, animal tax, use the land tax, property tax, and they just can't even repay their loans, so they know they're going to get their farms confiscated. And that's all part of the plan by design anyway, in addition to dumping the cheap Ukrainian grains across the European zone. They've had it. They're up against the wall where there's nothing else to live for. They either fight or they die, and that is the choice they have right now. So we are going to watch them fight. And, I sent Ransom a couple images of the farmers, A, digging up the roads, and then B, putting dirt all over the roads to create farm fields in the roads. So it would take the average, let's say, cleanup crews in France months just to get the roads clean. And then I saw them on overpasses dumping a huge amount of farm debris on the high-speed rails and on the rail lines below the overpasses, which is not being widely shown in the news. They've crippled Europe. And the Germans are behind it also, and Netherlands and Poland and Bulgaria, and it just goes on with Italy. Switzerland joined in for a minute, but that's another thing to look at. And also tonight, the Arctic Century. I don't know if many of you are aware of the Arctic route that's about to open. I hadn't until I'd done a little more research. Russia, it has a huge fleet of nuclear icebreakers, and they are now continually keeping that, what is considered an ice-bound route open. And they're going to add 27 new more icebreakers in their fleet. And so St. Petersburg is the main shipbuilding area. And they're going to have a new route that competes directly with the routes that we understand that are controlled by the U.S. Navy and those Western powers on the oceans with the destroyers, battleships, and aircraft carriers. But the thing about the Arctic route, 95% of it's along Russian territory until it's open ocean and right over to China. So this is a direct competitor. And now once you see the Arctic Century and the Arctic route, it makes a lot more sense why they're really going after Russia. And ding, 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 new bank failure starting right now. It does look as if we are heading for another one here. I can't explain it to you why, but it is. The bank that bought Signature Bank, of all things, when they were in duress, New York Community Bank, is now in a bank run phase, and their stock collapsed 40% after their earnings call. But they're the ones who acquired Signature Bank after they failed. So we're just getting into a doom loop here. So who knows if they'll stop trading by, luckily it's coming into a Friday. So again, these Fridays are kind of dangerous, as we know through history. Bank runs and bank holidays usually occur on Fridays. So anyway, Ransom, I'll start us off there. There's a lot of goodies to talk about tonight. Plus, on your end, you're covering a few things I'm not because I'm in a different part of the world. 11 a.m. start time for me. I'm now in Asia, and I'm diving through. We're going to head to Japan, in Taiwan, looking through the, again, nautical museums, ancient history museums, to see on this side in Asia what they're showing as reference to the higher tides. Because, we saw this thing in the Marshall Islands. We've seen the rogue waves, bashing ferries and breaking windows over in Germany. Had those extremely high tides all up and down the West Coast, up near Portland, etc. And now we got the double arc storms with massive waves. After the massive waves, which were unfathomable, came out of nowhere in Southern California, a month and a half ago. So we're starting to see a lot of tidal action that really kind of gives credence to there's something inbound, and the reason governments are preparing around the world is for the event here that starts in October of this year. So anyway, man, the floor is yours, and thanks for joining tonight.
Yeah, so I was misunderstanding. What is this Arctic Sentry, a military operation? I found it on the internet. It seems to be like a global warming summit there to go study how we're destroying the planet. And, it's funny that you brought that up because I sent you this older article about the military buildup, right, in the Arctic. And it talks, basically this article saying that, some of the other governments, they don't want them to do it because of climate change. They're worried about greenhouse gas emissions with all of these, military operations going on in the Arctic. What do you think's really I'll be honest, I don't believe that even though they say they're going to do military actions because of climate change, I don't actually believe that they do, missions that somehow help the environment with guns and, tanks, armored vehicles, submarines, etc. I don't see that going. What is it that, why is there, and it's funny that, we're skipping forward and you're seeing all this stuff with the farmers. What you're seeing is World War in slow motion, right? Because now they're firing rubber bullets at the farmers in Brussels. You have, like you said, they're tearing up the roads and stuff. That's exactly what you would do right before a battle starts. And if you don't believe me, look at the Israeli forces as they destroy all the roads in Gaza. There's a reason for that. They don't want any vehicles or easy transportation happening in a combat zone that's going to be more and more of a combat zone going forward. Think about that as it applies to Europe. I know that it's the farmers that are doing that, but the farmers are not silly, and the farmers, most of them probably had grandparents that lived through World War II and remember some of the tactics told to them and talked to them about, because you have to remember it wasn't really that long ago. We're only talking about, I'm going to say a full generation, not the 20-year generation, but since World War II, it's been a full generation, and all of those people that had to do with that died. However, their children and grandchildren, who some of them were educated by that, I'm sure as well in Europe as they are in the U.S., all kinds of things, technical things, combat things, anything you can think of, all of the great advice and hand-me-downs of knowledge, skills, and other things. So I think that's what you're seeing there in Europe. They're going to tear up all the roads. The governments are going to go heavy-handed. Some of the countries are going to start taking sides. And then eventually the people necessarily would have to take the sides of the farmers, right? Because we know what their plan is by 2030. That's their agenda, right? Is to shove everybody in 15-minute city-like states and remove the independent small farmer. And when you do that, you allow the elite at the very top of the pyramid to control the entire food pyramid, so to speak, all the way down. So they're the only ones that will have food because they're not allowing a competition to grow the food. And, back again to military tactics, starve out your enemy before you take over. And when we know that the populations of the world are about to plummet, necessarily and mathematically for all kinds of different reasons. And then you see the world powers setting up to help facilitate the exponential decrease in the human population. You have to wonder what's going to happen in, the next 6 years, right? It's just under 6 years now until the time that they wanted their agenda done. And what's in their agenda? Well, it was shutting down farming, shoving everybody in these little zones, right, that they have to live in, and you can't live outside of those zones. You can't be out there with the wilderness because they're trying to do something, I think, design it or, engineer a new wildlife wilderness ecosystem around the world that they think they're gods at this point. It's pretty obvious. But, there's one problem. There's a big pack of monkeys. And I've been thinking a lot about civilization and actually how far we've, strived or achieved or where we place on the grand scheme of things compared to the other animals in the animal kingdom. And, other than going, maybe if you count it into space, we haven't even achieved a much more of a level than, say, insects, a colony of ants or bees or wasps or something like that. We have the same kind of hierarchy. We force the entire swarm to do the, monarch or the elite's biddings and decisions. And I was looking at this article here from The Sun talking about over in India, 3,500 strong army of marauding monkeys invade city center, forcing tourists and locals to flee and shops to close, which, if you're familiar with India, this is actually happens all the time, but it's not such a big horde of animals like 3,500. Now, if you just change this over to people, and, this scenario, in my opinion, is making itself more and more evident by the day that there's going to be a massive food production shutoff by design. And part of that is this revolt from the farmers saying no, because they're responding to the edicts of the elite who are trying to shut them down. So obviously the empire will strike back, but I wonder how long it'll take before Europe has torn up streets and mobs of marauding humans starving and looking for food. And, and what will a Western world look like with millions and millions upon millions of extra hungry mouths when the whole system is shut down for whatever, reason or another. And I think that, they're going to send this World War III scenario. But first, they love to implement stuff. First, you have to starve out your enemy. First, you have to create atrocious conditions for the peoples, which includes cutting off their heating oils, and just necessarily people start dying. And we kind of called that a couple of weeks ago, right before that storm came. And you said, what do you think will, outcome of this? And I thought, just like every time, a bunch of people are going to die that took it for granted what they had. They didn't prep right, or, they didn't even think about prepping, or they just thought, it'd be like any other time where they live through it and make it through. But they didn't, because we had like 90 U.S. deaths. And, we now know like thousands upon thousands of people in the UK died of basically being cold. But yet the UN and the WHO and all of these other organizations tie up into one, cult of the climate, telling you that you have to do certain things because of that. And now we're in a situation where they have basically shut down civilization. And we're at that point right now. And these people are pushing this climate narrative to the point where people are dying because of the cold, while they're telling you that the world's going to burn up and that you're the cause of that. So we live in a totally topsy-turvy, upside-down, fictional world. And it's becoming more and more fictional as the years go on. And right now, kind of predicted by a lot of people, the mainstream media is shutting down. Right. So they're all going broke and they're closing up. They're allowing AI to write the remaining articles, which is another indication of civilization fail, where they're putting it on autopilot and not giving you real news. So what's going on right now is you can watch, American television. You probably don't see the turmoil going on in Europe. What you're seeing is, snippets of the border, snippets of the Middle East. things like that. Well, all kinds of major operations are going forth around the world. We're exponentially heading to this singularity where the world is not going to be the same as it is. Me and you and everybody else that's grown up listening to this in their lifespan got used to living in what we call civilization there. It's going to be very uncivil, and civilization, like any other empire, is collapsing. But the problem is the people that are supposed to be managing it are treating it like a corporation that they know is going to be bought out by another corporation. They're treating it like they know insider information that the company's going to fail, and they're all jumping ship and taking whatever they can take with them. And that's why you see, I think, these banks starting to fail. And it's inevitable that these monetary systems have to reset. So the big question is will they pull something major between 2024 and 2030 to complete their already, foretold agenda, and they pushed it on it. And believe me, these elites are just like Satanists with the rules of how they operate, where they'll tell you what they're going to do to you before they do it, and therefore, they're absolved of any obligation or guilt associated because you walked in to the trap they told you they were setting.
Yeah, well, that's by design. In today's newsletter, the show notes from last week, just before the show, I referenced that Albert Pike letter in 1871 that laid out all the three world wars. And after talking with Mark Carpenter, he describes the rulers, the elite, as we understand them, as a different bloodline, as an invasive hominid species that's here to dominate and enslave the indigenous population of this planet. It's beyond what you consider corporate control. It's one species dominating another species because their bloodline is not ours. As the stories go back in the diffused bloodlines of the sociopaths and psychopaths at high levels in government, now that's a diluted bloodline. But there are still the pure bloodlines that are just nefarious, incredible evil that still exist in the shadows. They exist underground. The stories of old of these beings, these original, invaders, for a better term, are still with us. These beings, apparently following, the stories of ages past in timelines and kingship, etc., place unknown from departure on their end. Was it external planet? Was it interdimensional? Or have they been here all along? And that's the gaslight. That it's an interdimensional, it's an external, when all along they're existing underground for millions of years. This is the kind of thing we got into in our talk, but regardless of the timelines or where these invasive hominid species has come from, they're out in the open now. They want to rule, and they are getting off on the carnage. They enjoy the destruction. They relish the pain and the anguish that they cause our species. They're not human. That's the thing. And the whole reset of it is this food shut off by design is going to be nothing more than a consolidation in a single area of the planet where all food is grown in North Africa and the Sahel. And it would be distributed across the planet. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you go down to southern Africa, you can find something called the Kalahari Canals. And if you look at it in today's terms, it would be enough to feed 1 billion people, because these canals are about 75 feet in width and about 30 feet tall on average. And it comes out of the back of the Okavango Delta, which would be a natural drainage area anyway, with the waterworks and the earthworks that were done. Now, in a previous reset, not the latest one, but 2 resets ago, that area had been flooded to the point of earthworks were damaged because of tidal action coming off of what we consider the Atlantic Ocean and that slosh effect. But it's been done once already in southern Africa. And like I say, the scale of it being in today, what we could do with farming would be at least at the minimum 1 billion people. And when I was doing some of the research here, people were like, well, your 1 billion people are talking about the Homo sapien at our size of 6 foot. What if it was for a previous generation of giants that were 8 to 10 foot tall? Like, then you need to cut your carrying capacity based on that. And would it be regional or local, specifically for Africa, or were they exporting? And what types of foods, superfoods and things, There was a whole debate on timelines at 2 resets ago on the size of the species living on the planet. But this, brings me into the anniversary of the celebration of the liberation of Leningrad during World War II. Now, for all of you out there, Stalingrad was also under siege. Leningrad and Stalingrad both, but you hear about Leningrad far more because there were more people who starved in that place. But they have the photo of the recreation of people getting their daily ration. And the daily ration was 100 grams of, not bread that we think today about, fluffy bread. It was more like a real dense packed, like cornbread type of thing, for a better term, made out of barley or whatever kind of grain they could scrape together. 3 ounces of bread per day per person. And then it ran out. But the recreation of the ration being given to them at such subsistence levels, which wraps right back into what you're saying, Ransom. Like, if you're going to overtake a city or a country, you are going to cut off their food first. You're going to make them incredibly weak. And when your body doesn't have the food, like we talked about ad nauseum, if you don't have the fats, you're not thinking correctly. If you don't have the calories and the fats, your carbohydrate, you're not moving. Your body shuts down, your mind shuts down. How easy would it be to overtake an enemy like that, or a foe? But see, this thing with the European farmers under siege right now, they get it. That's the problem with the elite. They don't understand that they get it. The farmers understand, find it. I don't know what the trigger was. I don't know what it was. But something kind of jumped the shark. And for some reason, this time, it is very, very different. Like, we've seen these farmer protests come and go in different countries. Like the Netherlands was a good one, but nobody really supported them. Oh, it's the Netherlands. Oh, they're going to do. But for some reason, the new taxes and regulations that have come in the last 6 months or under, and the railroading of all of these funds to Ukraine when these farmers are skipped by, when they're in dire need of financial support because they're being choked off with these new taxes and regulations. They have the new nitrogen fertilizer tax itself, but then they have a new runoff fee that comes. So if you're going to be put in, let's say you apply 1 ton of nitrogen fertilizer, they look to see what the absorption rate is in this particular crop, in this particular area, and they're using LiDAR and a whole bunch of other GIS software for mapping details. And then anything that leaves your property, there's another fee for, a tax, and it's an environmental damage fee on the nitrogen side. Well, the same goes with the herbicides, pesticides, which again have a different input tax on it. We could call it a carbon tax for the production, the delivery, and then the distribution of that on top of. And then the tires have a new tax on them too. They have a new, it's not really a carbon tax, it's more of a disposal fee tax, because they're trying to say, whenever your tire is unusable, sometime in the future, you're going to have to put it in the landfill. So we're going to tax you now. And they're going to have to pay for it later too. And then the engine oils. There's a new tax on engine oils for farm machinery, diesel fuels, DEF, which is the thing that they also do for, pollution regulation, or, cleaning of the engine exhaust before it leaves their engines. There's a new DEF tax also. So the whole point, and then on top of that, to add insult to injury, they're dumping all these grains. Now, I couldn't figure out the pricing on the grains, because every time I would look from Ukraine, it came out as a different like sell point on, generally when you're going to buy grain, just for like a 101, you're looking at what would be like on the Chicago market, at the Mercantile Exchange, or there's grain-based tradings out there where you can see how much it costs per bushel or per ton, depending how you want to cut it up. But then there were all these different pricing mechanisms for the Ukrainian grain that made no sense. Like one day it's 30% of the contract price on the CME, and then the next day it's 80%. Okay, it's a 20% discount, but they're trying to force a ton, I mean, not tons, but hundreds, millions of tons in at 70% below market value across Europe. Now think about this with the farmers. Like they got all these 10 or 12 new taxes added into their operating costs instantly. I don't know where they came from. Just boom, these last WEF meetings, and suddenly there's 12 new taxes on everybody's running of their machines and operating. And there's a whole bevy of new methane emissions taxes and all types of things for cattle waste, et cetera, that hasn't hit the books yet. And the same thing it's still under ratification, but they say there'll be no new taxes, blah, 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 for this, that, or the other. But they still haven't ratified what they need to do for poultry waste, poultry methane emissions, cattle waste, methane emissions. And there's a huge amount of regulation coming down the pike for animal husbandry. The taxes already set are for the grain farmers. So now we're starting to move into, you're watching the pendulum swing to the people who haven't been hit by the taxes yet going, oh, you guys just got steamrolled over to the point where you're going to lose your farms. You can't afford to pay your loans back. The taxes are too high. There's no way to sell the grains. Because here's the problem. Like let's say you're in Romania, for example, or Bulgaria, or like Lithuania, or somewhere over there in Eastern Europe. Slovakia, Slovenia would fall under this same guise here. Once you produce your grain and you try to take it to market, with the Ukrainian dumping, there's no buyers out there. There are, as long as you lower your prices down to the Ukrainian 70%, 50%, 20% below market value, then they'll take on your grains. And this is where it got into a pushing match here. It's like, wait, you just dumped all this grain and now I got to cut my prices 50% to compete with dumped Ukrainian grain. Okay. Like Italy wasn't playing it. And they really put a firewall up around the Ukrainian grains because they were really trying to protect their own internal Italian farmers, the Italian farmers. The whole thing that they're starting to understand is it's not about adding new taxes and funding Ukraine and protecting Ukraine and all these little talking points that they put on the TV. It is an in-motion program to confiscate all farmland across Europe, under the guise of helping the environment, helping a different country, etc. Okay, but then they just passed the 54 billion and sent all that money past all these farmers who are going to lose their lands because they can't pay. So for some reason, they've all woken up to the same plight. Like, you know what? We're all in it together, and all of us are all going to have our land stolen unless we stop it right now, because the first confiscations are coming right now of the farmlands. So the stand up against, because even in Brussels, yeah, they went in there and in front of the parliament in the EU and started blocking it off. And then, police were coming in with rubber bullets. It won't take them too long. I'm as sad as this is to say, they're going to go to live rounds pretty soon because these guys are not backing off. They are not stepping down. And I think another thing that inflamed and threw a gallon of gasoline on the fire was Klaus Schwab bragging at the meetings in the World Economic Forum meetings that, oh yes, we let the farmers protest, we give them the right, we let them protest for 48 to 72 hours to blow off the steam, then we make them go away because we know they're powerless to do anything, and we give them the time to blow off the steam. Well, once those public statements came out, it angered the farmers even further that you're not even taking our demands seriously. You're not even taking it seriously at all. And then other leaders, and I forget which country it was. I did a post on Patreon for this one. It wasn't Hungary. It was Austria, perhaps, but they were calling the farmers who were asking for reduced tariffs terrorists. And they said, we don't deal with terrorists in this country, and you farmers are terrorists for asking for reduction in fees and taxes. So even their own elected leaders are now against them. So, I mean, it's come off the rails. And, Ransom, you're seeing a ton of stuff go off over here too, like soil remediation with JDAM. That's a great one of the Korean natural farming. But, bringing it in at mass and getting traditional agriculture to adopt to that system, we're talking about 1 billion acres across the planet of farmland. JDAM and these other technologies with biochar and soil enhancements with a BioNoc and inoculated soils, that's awesome. Works amazingly well on small scale, local farm. But to bring it up to agricultural levels, to revamp 1 billion acres in the next couple of years, that's a no-go. Microbial solutions, awesome-amente. But even now, they're starting to demonize the local home farmer. Now, Ransom, I don't know if you saw that article. They said that home gardening, you release 5 times more CO2 than traditional agriculture that uses tractors, nitrogen fertilizer, chemical fertilizers, glyphosate, and all the things we used with heaters and dehydrators, grain mills. You as a local guy and me as my local guy growing vegetables in my backyard is supposedly putting up 5 times more CO2 than that huge agriculture, the agribiz. So, everywhere you look in, the gaslighting gets thicker and thicker. But the European farmers see through the gaslighting. I guess they cleared the fog out somehow. Not sure, but I'm glad it's in motion.
What I find bizarre about all of that is from the farmers' protests to the rules from the WEF to supposed accidents that are happening all over the world. Like, was it yesterday they had a giant natural gas pipeline blow up in Oklahoma. You had a chicken plant burning up in Texas. And this is stuff that we've been seeing for the last 2 years, right? So this is like either one of the most, horrible and unlucky times in commercial food production and heating production, or there's a systematic shutdown of the entire, Western world as far as being able to be comfortable and do things. And you were talking for just a second about how being malnourished would be one of the steps that an outside influence would have if they were going to take over. But that's not the only one. Also, you would have people in mental disarray, divided and conquered, totally distracted by silliness, Taylor Swift this, Taylor Swift that, or, the list goes on and on. You would have these psychological programs and simultaneously using other programs like, say, biological or things like that to reduce the immune system and health functions of large populations of the world right before you would want to have an ultimate conflict. And then you would, start moving the troops around. And then necessarily that populations of civilians are going to protest and get upset, thereby becoming the insurgents and terrorists. And it is all by design, exactly like that. And you brought up this letter to Albert Pike, which I don't actually know if it's been verified as a real letter. But regardless of that, we know about Karl Marx. We know about Joseph Stalin. We know about Mao. We know about the Jacobinsons. We know about the Fabian Socialists. We know about all of these groups that have over time used each other to perpetrate programs of communism, Marxism, and utter shutdown of the productive aspect of the population, because the same thing happens time and time again. You attack the producers, you attack the landowners, farmers, food producers, you attack the educators that don't go along with the narrative, you attack the scientists that won't go along with the narrative. You do this, you destroy the entire civilization as it regards to intellectual thinking and creativity. So once you've done that, you tear it down, you have a communist style government that completely smashes. And we know what that looks like. That's massive populations declining from democide. The governments do it. Now, they start with these different programs, and it takes a while to get to that last, stage where they're literally pointing a barrel at you and telling you to get in the ditch or dig the ditch for yourself. But we know that happens over and over and over and over again. I mean, how many times do we have to see it unfold in history to know that a seemingly peaceful, civilized, free country can, totally reverse and inverse on itself in a matter of a decade or less? And I see that happening here in the U.S. For the first time ever. Our birth rates are lower than the amount of people immigrating illegally inside the United States. On top of that, you even have spokespersons across the United States now. This is how bad it's got. Spokespersons that are in favor of mass immigration are now telling people to stay home because conditions are getting too packed. There's not enough resources. There's not enough jobs. There's not enough food. There's not enough space. And, even if you use a population of pretty charitable people, after a while, they realize they're being taken advantage of, and the charity dries up, which means the food kitchens dry up. And, people wanting to donate to things dries up. I saw, ironically, there's like a viral video going around of some girl from Colorado talking about, how people are crazy, that they're worried about the border because there's only like 12 people probably in their state that are illegal. And simultaneously on the news, they're showing, thousands of people downtown freezing because they're not used to these sub-zero temperatures and low temperatures in Colorado and other places. And they are starting to have casualties because of that. So our melting pot is completely full, and they're still packing more and more into it. So obviously we need a way out. What is it going to be? Amelia Hart's, discovering Amelia Hart's airplane, some kind of major distraction to move people away from realizing, because every time the public seems to get to an epic point of realization of government tyranny and the programs that are being passed forward to push over them and replace them and move them out, they get upset and they start protesting, they start revolting, and then comes another either mass war or mass distraction to put them back in their place. And it's the whole thing about the Tower of Babel, but in a technocratic form. Every time the population gets to a certain point, they just knock us back down, and we are in that phase right now. But there's not just that happening. Like I said, there's an overwhelming correlation and crisscrossing of many patterns happening within this decade. You have the realization of the Marxists and their, revolutions, because don't argue. It's hard to argue that that's not happening in the U.S. You see Marxist policies everywhere. And then in the religious aspect, let's get back to the Albert Pike thing. So the proposed idea there for World War III was to enrage the Abrahamic religions and cause them to start a mass combat against each other, a mass war against each other, and then unleashed like the atheists and the nihilist type of organizations and people upon the world. And I ask you not, is that also now happening, just, like part of that plan? And then eventually these two groups would necessarily annihilate each other, leaving the upper class, getting rid of all of the societal problems all at once. And then having a new system go forward from there. But in order to do that, they have to have the three Abrahamic religions on fire, upset, and participating in a world conflict. If they can't do that, it's hard for their plan to go forward. And if you think about why that they're alienating Christians in the United States, you have one guy that chops the head off of a Satan guy, and he's getting charged with a hate crime. Meanwhile, for the past 2 years, every American icon and historical institution has been damaged, destructed, or the statues toppled, everything graffitied and vandalized, and those things are left unchecked. You have summers of rioting and burning down civilization. It goes unchecked. It's not only unchecked, it's kind of promoted. And then when the middle guy, the regular citizen, starts a little bit of a milquetoast riot near where they're at, in their neck of the woods where they think it possibly, might endanger them in some way or make them look bad, they go overboard with propaganda that's silly, and it shows you what they're really afraid of. They're really afraid of their masks coming off completely and the population being able to respond fast enough. Their hopes are we'll stay distracted, continue down the road of, fiction and relative silliness in society, arguing about things that don't matter, while they destroy the backbone of modern civilization, which is nation states and the production, mass production of food for the populations of this world. And it's pretty obvious. We just need one event, and I don't know what that's going to be. I think somebody might drop a bomb. As you've seen, the UK just tested a nuke. We're moving nukes all over Europe. They're restarting the Cold War, but I don't think it's going to be a Cold War this time. It's going to be a hot war, and they're going to redesign the map, and they're going to press new rules on a worldwide population in decline.
Yeah, and that's where we sit at the precipice. Oh, I did want to add up. In Italy also, they had a fire at the largest vertical integrated pesticide-free facility in Europe as well. The same, it was 2 days before the chicken facility went up in Texas. And I'm looking at like, how does a chicken facility burn? It was totally engulfed. It was like a 5-alarm at a chicken facility. I've been to a lot of chicken facilities, and I'll tell you a couple of personal stories here. Like, I was going down to the Atlanta airport one time. My parents were driving me down because, we're just going to hang out. And I was going to travel, and they're like, hey, we'll drive you down. We got the time. Let's go hang out. We'll get dinner before you go and whatever. Okay, great. Let's go. But I was like, hey, Dad, I want to stop at this Georgia Guidestones place. And he's like, yeah, I've heard other people talk about it. Why don't we go drive out there? And this place called Elberton, it was way out in the middle before they destroyed it. It's like, you come off I-75 and need to go east, like, an hour and a half way out. But the whole thing was you had to drive through the Tyson chicken facilities. And I mean, the minimum that you could get at that time, if you were involved in their program, you had to be running 80,000 chickens to be eligible to even have Tyson come out, or the state, which they often do, or the USDA come out and build your facility for you at no cost. But a lot of those were defunct. But having seen a lot of these chicken facilities, there's not a lot in there that burns. It's mainly open air. Yeah, there's some straw on the floor. Yeah, there's some sawdust on the floor. Yeah, you might have a plastic covering on the housing, whatnot, but most times it's something a little bit more durable, that's a bit better temperature controlled. So when I looked at the chicken facility going up in smoke, and I'm like, how is that even possible? Because remember, we saw that potato storage warehouse too that burned to the ground and everything was ash. And I'm like, potatoes don't burn like that. You can't tell me that a full potato processing facility had, 10 or 20 tons of potatoes that weren't processed, that were in bins waiting to go through the process, that turned to ash. I'm like, wait a second, that just, something's very, very off here. And this many, again, remember a couple years ago, Ransom, you and I were talking about this a lot when there was just like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fires at these food processing warehouses and facilities. Seems like it had dropped off for a minute there, but it looks like it's turned back on again. So I think too many people started to report on it. So then all of a sudden they stopped and people forgot about it. Because, that's another, common thing that happens is things will go on under the nose of most of the population. But when enough people start reporting on it, where 5%, 10%, 15% of the population understands there's something else going on that doesn't make sense, it seems it suddenly stops, and it kind of the shuffleboard piece gets moved to another place. And then, that story goes away, and okay, it must have not really been a thing. And then it seems like we're right back at it again here. All these big fires at some of the biggest facilities left on the planet that didn't get taken out during round 1 are now being taken out in round 2. But again, you look at how they carpet bombed Dresden and how they did a huge amount of, night raids across Europe during World War II. They would take out parts of the city. They would try to take out the rail storage and rail depots first, and then they would go for the factory second, and then they would go for whatever third. It's the same. Maybe that was the first carpet bomb, was, taking all those easy facilities out of the way. And now we come back in and we're seeing this again in round two. But I had another personal story about monkeys and Pushkar. So, you know, the marauding monkeys are no joke. Like, I'm terrified. I'm not terrified, but I'm extremely cautious and nervous around monkeys. I got two monkey stories for you here. So the first one, no, actually three monkey stories. Thailand, terrible. Monkeys bad. Don't, you know, you might think they're cute and everything, and like, oh, look at the monkeys and stuff. If you have food in your bags, they're coming after you. And they got no morals. There's no rule of law in the monkey kingdom on you as a human. Let's say that. So I had one monkey jump on my backpack and rip it open, scared me to death, you know, because I had some food in the back and that scared me. But Pushkar in India, if you go way out west, before you get to Jaisalmer, which is out on the Pakistani border, if you get way out in Rajasthan, you go to this holy city called Pushkar. Magical little place, white marble, and it's a holy spot, and you can feel it when you get there. There's like really some very intense energies coming out of the earth there. So anyway, you know, hash is everywhere, tons of hash everywhere, and you know, I kept seeing these bands of monkeys like cruising across different rooftops, like further away from me. You know, we're sitting up there having a beer. And you know, whatever the goodness laying around in Pushkar is. And the band of monkeys was across the street. We finally saw them coming toward us. We were like, yeah, man, get the cameras out. We get some pictures. And they were pretty big monkeys. They were like the size, like the troop leader was a good size of like a 12-year-old child, you know, big, but girthier and muscular. You know, the thing stood 3.5 foot tall, easily, standing up maybe 4 foot. So anyway, these monkeys are cruising on the other side of the street, like, you know, a full street, which we understand, with sidewalks on a 3-story building. And they were on the other side of the street, 3 stories away. And I tell you what, those monkeys jumped down in almost a single bound off the street and boom, right up on the side of the building where we were sitting on the roof. And right on the edge of the wall. And you talk about getting put in your place. Like, it was unexpected. And see, I'm trying to bring a point around just for us in society. Looking at it and not being prepared for it. And not being prepared for the magnitude of it or the shock of it. Because that troop leader, when it came by, was like, you little humans over here, I got my kids behind me, I got my wife, I got my troop. You even move a single muscle and we are going to rip you to shreds. And, you know, just chilling, having some beers and whatever, puffer here up on the roof, expecting to enjoy some wildlife, and to get terrorized like that from those monkeys was just like really otherworldly. On how powerful they were. And the messaging, it wasn't messaging, they were actually telepathying into you. And, you know, when it comes to that kind of situation in real life, like, are you going to be prepared for that? Yeah, okay. Well, you see 5 guys walking across the field over there in your neighbor's property. Like, the time for you to process that, for you to get ready for something like that, and for you to interact with that, I mean, 99% of the people aren't going to even be ready. They're going to be overtaken just watching these people walk toward them going, yeah, they're walking toward us. Now what? You know, so the reason I tell you this story is the preparedness of that. Because if I would see that same thing happen again and I knew they were across the street, I would have bailed off the roof, you know, and been in a different spot. So when they passed, I wouldn't have been there. But the same thing in harm's way, you know, you're out in the farming community. Because I was reading one of the comments here over on Rumble, and this person says, you know, I live in a lib city, got 6 weeks of food, and then I'm going to, you know, let the chaos spin me by and can hang out for 6 weeks. I'll read this. I live in a lib city. I got enough to last me for 6 weeks for travel and 6 weeks in place. I'll be waiting out the beginning of the collapse, then going when the initial off and violence pass, when the initial collapse and violence pass. Well, I would say By that point, 6 weeks in, those gangs will have formed and will have already demarcated zones and set up boundaries on where their areas are. 6 weeks later, trying to transit through that, yeah, right. It's going to be no different than warlords taking over in an area again. Just as those monkeys dominated their area, I mean, dominated that place. For the human domain, you were nothing. You're like an insect. And when I say that, I've never seen monkeys this big. These things are like 3-4 feet tall, just incredibly girthy, but not 1, 2, like, 5 to 10 really big ones, and then all the other troop behind them. And man, they were ready to rumble at a fifth of an eighth of a second, not even going to blink before they moved into action, because there's no repercussions for them. There's no like law in that animal kingdom. And man, they were ferocious. And I tell you what, that's what really scares me about monkeys still, is how fast they are, how strong they are, and just the raw animal instinct in those things to protect themselves or go after food. I've had 2 monkeys jump on my back trying to get food out of a backpack before. So I learned, even though you think you got your food in your backpack and they're not going to smell it or know you have food, they do. They absolutely know. They absolutely know. But bring that into the human domain. You waited 6 weeks to get out of the city. Okay, there's still going to be some people around, but the only people around are the ones who took advantage of others in a city and their super control, violent way to control the resources and take the resources with violence to be able to have the resources. You probably won't make it out of that city. You're going to have to go through gangland after gangland after gang zone after warlord zone to even think about Somalia. You're going to be looking at Mogadishu. And you think you're going to get out of there with your supplies of 6 weeks of stuff? I really would say, just out of of thinking how I would think. Now, it's not for everybody. It's how I would think. You got 48 hours to get out. Maybe 72, because they usually look in collapse scenarios. Usually everybody's super, super confused the first 24 hours. They're a little bit less confused 48th hour. And then they really start to realize there's a big problem at the 72nd hour. And after that, they're like, we don't have resources. We're running out of food. We ran out of food already. We need to get more food. And, that 4th day of travel becomes a little more, I should say, a lot more dangerous, because people are getting a little more desperate. They need the help. They don't have the help. They're gonna grab anything that's moving to try to get help, get food, get water. Because you got to think about that. If your car breaks down, let's say there's an EMP that hits the U.S. or something crazy like that, and everything just stops. How much food is in an average car? How much water is in an average car? Like, what if you're 50 miles from your home? You're not going to make it home generally, unless you're breaking into people's houses and you're getting food and water from their homes as you make it home. But after that first, 48 hours of somebody no eat, no drink, they're going to do anything they can to get food and water. After 72 hours, you're going to watch people turn into those same push car monkeys again. They're going to do anything they can for survival. And imagine if 2 or 3 of them get together. And then what? That's the gangs. That's what you need, and then, what if 5 of them are walking across your property? Again, that whole processing of it, like, just as strange as it was, as shocking to process all those monkeys jumping, and not like, if you would have seen them climbing up, it would have been a little different. But they jumped in one jump off the 3rd floor across the street with sidewalks, 2 lanes, one jump, bound, and then bounded up on top of there in like a split second. It was so awe-inspiring, the feat of what they did, their physical, like, wow. To watch something move that elegantly and that just powerfully, like, through the medium of air and gravity to jump onto the other, it's like, that in itself was enough to, like, reset your reality. If something can do that, that's 30 foot down and 30 foot up, and they did it in like seconds. But just to be right there in front of you. And that's no different than groups of people walking across that are armed across your property or across your farm fields or in your farm community coming up toward you. You're going to just have really just seconds to react to that. And again, if you haven't seen it or prepared for it, it's going to catch you off guard. And that's the whole thing, is being prepared for some of these things. Just like with food and water, 6 weeks, it's a good start. It is. It'd be great if you could take it on the road and then be able to get into a place, so you're not going to rely on other people. Hey, I got 12 weeks of food. Okay. Can you repair anything? What's your skill set? Can you help the community? Like, how can you, how good are you to help protect with security? Do I even trust you? That's the whole big thing. Is like during these times, like Ransom, man, I'll let him in, his family and everybody. You come on and stay on my farm, bro. I trust you, because we've been together and talking and doing all this stuff years before anything bad happened. But as soon as something goes down and you're at that last one, like, hey, I need help now. I'll work on your farm because nobody's going to trust. That's the whole thing. You got to be out to these places before the events happen. And Ransom, I know I rambled through there, man. Take us out for a 2-minute quickie here. What do you think? We'll be on break in a minute here. Are you still there? Can you throw 2 minutes of goodness at us?
Yeah, I thought in the next half of the thing,
This is the story of the worst road trip ever. In April of 1846, a man named James Fraser Reed, an Illinois businessman, eager to build a greater fortune in the rich land of California, leads 9 covered wagons out of Springfield, Illinois, on the 2,500-mile journey to California, in what would become one of the greatest tragedies in the history of westward migration. Reed found others seeking to find fortune, adventure, and new beginnings on this perilous trek across the West. Among them was the Donner family. Others like the Graves, Breens, Murphys, Eddies, McCutcheons, Kesebergs, and the Wolfingers would come too. The successful Reed was determined his family would not suffer on the long journey, as his wagon was an extravagant 2-story with a built-in iron stove, spring-cushioned seats, and bunks for sleeping, and 2 hired servants to help with the workload. Reed's 12-year-old Virginia dubbed it the Pioneer Palace Car. Also in the group were the families of George and Jacob Donner. George Donner was a successful 62-year-old farmer who had migrated 5 times before settling in Springfield, Illinois, along with his brother Jacob. Obviously adventurous, the brothers decided to make one last trip to California. At the bottom of Jacob Donner's saddlebag was a copy of Lansford Hastings's Emigrant's Guide, with its tantalizing talk of a faster route to the Garden of the Earth. It's tough, but the going's good. Tamsin Donner writes in her journal, I could never have believed we could have traveled so far with so little difficulty. Indeed, if we do not experience anything worse, I shall say the trouble is all in getting started, but as leader of the wagon train, Tamsin's husband George Donner is aware there's one final obstacle to their journey, the Sierra Nevada, with peaks up to 14,000 feet. It's known if you fail to clear the mountain passes before the first snow falls, the repercussions and results can be both horrifying and deadly. As the Donner Party approaches Utah, George Donner makes a pivotal flaw in his decision to splinter off from the main party. Hastings Cutoff says it's a fine level road with plenty of water and grass, saving 400 miles. As it turns out, Donner's information is wrong. In fact, the so-called shortcut adds at least 100 miles to the journey. High in the Sierra Nevada, the Donner Party enters the Truckee Pass. They're only 30 miles from the California plains, but supplies are dangerously low, and traveling through the mountains is taking its toll, ending in a broken axle. The Donner Party stops to make repairs, but that night, 5 feet of snow falls. Soon the drifts are 60 feet deep. The Donner Party will be stranded for 5 months. In just 3 weeks, they've eaten all their food. Then they kill their pack animals. Next, they eat charred bones, twigs, bark, leaves, and dirt. Finally, a suggestion was made that were one to die, the rest might live. Cannibalism. On Christmas Day 1846, a Christmas feast like few others takes place. They devour their first human. Bodies are cut up, flesh labeled so people don't eat their own kin. Later, 4 rescue parties bring out some survivors. The very last finds a man named Ludwig alone. Around him, a scene that haunts us today and will continue to leave a lasting mark in history. Ludwig is surrounded by bones and entrails, a 2-gallon kettle filled to the brim with human blood. Also nearby is George Donner's body, his skull split open, his brain removed. Tamsin Donner's body is never found. It also seems a man named William Foster shot 2 Miwok Native American guides named Lewis and Salvador for food, which is the only instance of anyone in the Donner-Reed party that was murdered and eaten. The rest of the cannibalized were already dead. They took the survivors to Sutter's Fort, California, by the route that is now known as Donner Pass. Stranded in the early snows of the Sierra Nevada mountains, nearly half the travelers died of starvation and illness. Even today, Interstate 80 has to be closed occasionally due to heavy snows and blizzards. Only 45 of the original 81 members of the Donner Party survived. This truly was the worst road trip ever, which reminds us not to be complacent but instead be proactive with our prepping. We don't have to worry about not having food to last. We have My Patriot Supply. And right now, you can save $200 on a 3-month food kit with Adapt 2030. Adapt and stay prepared.
The remix, I forget the guy's name, the remix of Gotta Get Up, with the gold microphone, drinking the beer in the morning. That's a funny one. For Revolution Radio, thank you for letting us talk tonight and have our discussion here. If anybody out there, they didn't hit their costs for running costs and management costs and production costs last month. So consider a donation to keep this free venue on air. There's a lot of things going on right now that need to be discussed, that you need to keep yourselves and your families safe moving through these changes. So if you are going to consider a donation, right here at Revolution Radio, head on over there to revolution.radio and you'll find different ways you'll be able to support the station. You can even send some crypto if you like, check, PayPal. Was PayPal, but again, see, that's what I don't like, is PayPal cut them off. Now, why would they do such a thing? Oh, wait a second. There was a concerted effort by these same groups of, whatever they are, these think tanks that then push these media watchdog groups to then target those who are speaking truth for demonetization or removal from platforms that can pay. So consider a check, donation, anything you can. Support them on Patreon as well, right here at revolution.radio. As we move through the second hour, oops, hit the mic. Arctic Century is coming, but Ransom left us off here. Now, I did pull a screen. Ransom, I sent you this slide here on the break. Hope you can put it up. I'm just going to start us off, and I'll let you go from here because I rambled a little bit into the break there. We are looking at the tech recession 2024, the layoff announcements in 2024, just so far this month. This is the first, 2nd of February? Okay, this is just over a 48-hour period. Twitch is going to cut 35% of the workforce. Okay, Unity Software, 25%. Brex, which I never heard of, 20%. Discord, 17% down. Wayfair, 13%. Riot Games, 11%. Duolingo, that was the hottest thing to learn all these languages, down 10%. Rent the Runway, 10%. eBay, they're going to cut 9% of their staff. What does that tell you about online commerce? Well, something's happening. The advertisers aren't there, and the buyers aren't there. We got BlackRock, which is interesting, not Blackstone. Don't confuse the two. See, they made BlackRock and Blackstone very similar to confuse you. But BlackRock the more they're using Aladdin in their AI software program, the less staff that they need. So Aladdin is this trading algorithm that was running on AI before AI, basically. So what I see in the background is some of these things like OpenAI and this kind of stuff that you think, oh, it's all brand new. No, they've had it for decades. Or even the last decade, easily, because BlackRock goes in from just having, a few hundred million under management to controlling a quarter of the planet. Like their algorithm, they call it Aladdin for a reason. It is a magical, front-running trading order platform that front-runs everything by 1,000th to 100th of a second. And they scrape the difference off of everything. And by that, they're able to then purchase majority shares in most companies across the planet. And guess who? Guess who was the largest real estate buyer in the United States? That includes your home and my home, office buildings. BlackRock. They were the largest buyer of real estate in the United States last year, and they own, I think, up to, correct me if I'm wrong, Ransom, 20% of all real estate that is involved with the rental across the United States, whether it be a home or an apartment. I think they own 20% of all units for rental in the United States now. And then Citigroup cuts 20,000. and then Google cuts 1,000 plus. Oh, shaking, Google cuts. Why are they cutting? Oh, AI, I get it. But it seems like with more job cuts, they're going to have less disposable income. So less disposable income takes us into that doom loop of eBay not needing, and it just is going to continue. Are they going to need advertisers in the YouTube videos eventually? Maybe not. I don't know. But anyway, there's your roll off. So yeah, man, continue on the tech stuff. The tech, I forget the way you phrased it before we get on the break, but here's Ransom Godwin rolling in hour 2.
Yeah, well, I was going to talk about a couple of things that seem to be coming to fruition over the last couple of years. Is, you know, we have all of these strifes that they're putting out for the public mind to think about, different political topics, the possibility of war. And I know that we are going into a war, and you can just look at some of the stocks to kind of tell that. So you were just talking about all of those companies going down, and I just had an article open a second ago that was talking about the way that it's like the .com bubble, the tech industry. They're seeing signs of that. But on the backside, you see all of these news outlets, right? They're firing everybody. And just like we were talking about how the progression of things is incremental, I think that incrementalism is speeding up. So here, this is a chart of the U.S. oil production as it jumps to record high, 13.3 million barrels a day. And keep in mind that the Biden administration has been cutting back. So what do you think that we would need for a massive uptick in petroleum at a certain point in time? Maybe to run all of the, weapons of war that we're about to have. And then you have the U.S. wrapping a security blanket around D.C. They claim it's for the courthouse, but as we know, since the election, they've kind of put a wall around them. They don't want a wall at the border, but they want a wall around them to protect them from the peasants because they know things are, going crazy. But let's get into this tech thing. So we've been talking about how everything in the Internet of Things, which is every device, every gizmo gadget you could think of, including but not limited to implants, is going to be connected to the ID. The ID in the real definition of it, which is like the ego and the things that the mind deals with and overcomes, and all of them thought processes that make us an individual. But it's been boiled down to an ID that people think of as, oh, this is my identification. This is me. I have a card. I have a number. I have, an account or whatever. And it's getting boiled down to an electronic identification. So the ID will be your gateway to the Internet of Things, making all citizens idiots. And that may be a coincidence, or it may be a plan that those kind of just fit together, and you need your ID for the Internet of Things. And we were talking about soon, they're going to be popping these chips into people's brains. And I'm sure that like I do on the news, everybody's talking about it. Brain game, save your brain like a game, says Elon Musk, as Neuralink plan promises to prevent AI extinction, wiping out humanity. In other words, turning humans into AI. So I know a lot of people like Musk, but that's basically what he's talking about, is turning humans into a form of AI instead of a different AI replacing us, will replace the AI. So now in real time, we have people taking chips in their heads. This connects to the Internet of Things, where we have all kinds of different technologies that can control not only the choice of people, but their moods, their behaviors, what they believe, what they don't believe. They can even affect the part of your mind that believes in God and turn it on or off. They have machines that do that. Then we have notorious ransomware gangs claiming that they get all the classified and top secret documents from the U.S. intelligence agencies just in time for there be massive carnage. And you can really see how things are going downhill when you look at the things that are actually making money. And I remember I said this a couple of years ago, being sarcastic, that we shouldn't worry about any investments. We should just invest into the vice and the war machine. If you invest into the vice investments like alcohol, marijuana, gambling, Vegas casinos rake in record gambling revenue. You also have robots being deployed everywhere to protect nuclear sites, malls, food centers, things like that. And then racking in profits while fueling conflicts. U.S. foreign arms sales rocket to the record highs. So oil production is going up. We're at a time in the backdrop where they're creating a completely cyber world that will control every aspect of the human domain, from your banking, your healthcare, your choices, literally, on what you like and don't like, because you only get fed certain information. And then with all of the news agencies going over to an AI system, firing all the real reporters, those are indications that we're about to have something really big where they don't want people reporting on it. They want a complete top-down control of the information highway, or the thought highway. The highway of thought, I forget how you put it, which is designed to control what everyone thinks, how much information they get, and to punish them if they share unapproved information or misinformation. You think it's bad now with the climate? You think it's bad with the medical supplies that you might not believe in? What happens when a worldwide war is happening and millions of people are now starving all over the world? Well, you're not going to hear about it. And if you do hear about it, it'll be put to you in an artificial intelligence created propaganda. And who's to benefit from the entire system being controlled by artificial intelligence? This allows the elite in the background to do all their plans and get them to fruition. And what are we talking about? We're talking about seed vaults, bunkers, and then, they put out the predictive programming of like disease X. And I just read another one talking about, how the deer population, the food that we would be eating in case of an emergency or some kind of problem, we'd be going after that wildlife. So they're trying to tell you that wildlife is diseased, and you might pick up a disease from that wildlife that will wipe out humankind. All of these predictive programmings, it's like they preemptively struck the alternate food sources. I remember 2 years ago when all of the articles started coming out about how you could get sick from bacteria and viruses if you grow your own food. And then you fast forward to now where they're telling you that you're a bad person and you're creating all this pollution for having a couple of gardens in your yard, which and I know is complete propaganda and nonsense. We need more CO2. We need more plant life, more plant food, and the sun is going to decide what's happening. But I think they think something's going to happen. I don't know what it is, but I think that the elites are sure of it. And that's why they're putting the system on autopilot, not just the governing system. Think about it. So, who decides what medical care you have and different things. In Canada right now, we saw the incrementalism of getting rid of the population. It went from terminally ill people to mentally ill people to addicts. And now they're passing laws that you could get in trouble for trying to talk people out of it. In other words, you can get arrested now in a formerly free country for telling someone that the world might be a better place if they stayed in it. Now, I don't want to get too deep into that because you know how YouTube and others try to twist what's said. So I don't want to use certain words, but it's assisted population reduction. And that's going on. And it's weird to think at our point in civilization that countries are doing that. And we're having a problem creating new generations of people while they're telling you that the populations are overpopulated and that they want to reduce them. So I don't know what they're going to pull. I think over here in the United States, I wanted to get into this. Where do you think all of the weapons are coming from south of the border? Because, like a auto manufacturer, it's really easy to tell where a product came from. When you go outside and you get in your car, it says Honda right on it, Ford, Jeep, whatever. Well, guns are the same way. Arms are the same way. So when you're looking into a country that doesn't manufacture weapons, yet keeps coming up with massive amounts of them, you have to ask yourself, where is that coming from? So now we're wondering, is there another Fast and Furious going on? Why are all the cartels all of a sudden, flexing American-made M4s, body armor, RPGs, things like that? They're flaunting American-made knockoff AK-47s. In other words, they're not the real AK-47s, but they're new manufactured weapons. And we're seeing this at the same time they're telling us that we need to disarm in our country. And then you look over at Europe, And I saw a guy, I don't know if you saw this, but he went on a rampage with a crossbow and some body armor. And I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that nutty guy was doing anything good. But when it comes down to complete tyranny of world war, where people are fighting in the streets literally for not only territory, but scraps of food and things like that, we know how awful it got in World War II. Matter of fact, we talk a lot about saving metals back for future times and saving a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, for those people in Europe and other countries, it doesn't matter how much prepping that they did. It doesn't matter how much stuff they saved, how much precious metals they have, because they don't have any weapons. And just like people in World War II got abused, one of the first things they did was take away the guns. Then they shoved everybody into congested city areas. We got the term ghetto from that. And then they took away their personal belongings, their precious metals, any remaining weapons they had. And that has been done over an incremental timeline in the entire Western world, except for the United States. So if they can get the United States to fall, the entire worldwide communism, one world government plan comes to fruition. And then there's nothing stopping them from forcibly depopulating areas and telling people when and where they can travel, what they can eat, and how they can create it. Think about that, how bizarre it is that we're having ideas that came out of, old dark times like the Middle Ages and stuff, where you have people telling you can't farm, you can't eat the wildlife, that belongs to them, or better yet, it'll cause a disease that will kill everybody. So they're putting that predictive programming out there. And then the weird thing of the morality of a civilization. Now, there's been many arguments about the Roman Empire and others, the reason that they collapsed. I don't want to get into that, but you can clearly see in the civilization that we live in that we're going towards a more immoral type of civilization than a moral one. We're in a civilization that says it's okay to kill and to erase people as long as you're part of the right team. You can get rid of, children as long as you let the state do it for you. You can get rid of yourself if you let the state do it. And I don't see that being a very big space anymore between offering it voluntarily and then forcing you to do it later when it's deemed that that's a better idea for everyone, for the greater good, for the planet, for the human species. We just need to get rid of 90% of the population. And think about this. What is this world going to look like when we have transhumans that are part of a financial system that the regular humans are no longer part of, at the same time as laws and things being passed about not being able to be a natural living man, which includes hunting and farming, right? The two basic things that created civilization in the first place. And they are really, it's not hard to realize that they are attacking the idea of self-governed civilization and the whole concept of individual rights. Everything that made us become a successful species on this planet, they're now outlawing. Think about that. Defending yourself, creating things, growing things, ranching animals and domesticating them and eating the meat. And, they are outlawing having fruits of your own labor. That's what's going on. And while everybody's going to play with that, they're steadily militarizing the world. And it's just all going to happen once. And no one's going to realize, like you said, it's not like you're going to just jump in the car one day and leave because you realized it got too bad. They don't do things like that. They incrementalize them to the point where you're like the frog in the boiling water, where you never realize when was the right time to jump because it was so slow of a curve, you didn't see it coming. And just like, prehistoric human beings were not very good at planning ahead and dealing with problems in the future. And this has been proven over and over by not only psychologists, but people that study how the brain reacts to different problems and how it comes up with solutions. We can handle saber-tooth tiger. We can handle a dictator in an outfit, invading our country with military where we can see the enemy. What we can't do nothing about are plots, plans, and agendas that take decades to, come to fruition. But yet we're at that point now. And now everybody's waking up and realizing it. So they're about to have to get violent with the public. And that's the part that nobody wants to talk about, is how long is it going to be until your governments are being violent with you? And I think we're seeing in Europe that's already happening. That singularity is now playing out.
And it'll continue to play out. You know, I was just looking on my news feed while you were talking, and Ireland has now joined the farmers' protest, and Portugal also has stepped in. So it seems the tides are turning here. As before, as you mentioned, it was the WEF crowd, elitists saying, we'll tell you when you plebes can have food, like in the serfdom times of the 1400s. But it seems at this moment, this juncture, that the tides are turning, where the farmers are going to tell the elite, we'll give you food when we want to. By the way, we're going to make enough pain so the citizens turn on you. We're not going to starve them completely, but we're going to turn off the food supply so they come knocking on your doors asking for the food supply to be turned back on again. This is where we sit. And it does seem that what was once a individual country, the Netherlands, has become the entire EU. When will it become the entire planet, like you say? Because once it happens, it's more difficult to unlock it once it's put into place. So again, can you imagine trying to take away the IRS and undo all the tax laws and bring it back to a time prior to the ratification of the Federal Reserve in the Internal Revenue Service back in, let's say, 1910, 1913? It's already so strong and so ingrained that the chance of unwinding that is lower than at that time if they would have protested it and stopped it and tried to stop it at that time. But again, the percentages back then was 1 to 2%. So nobody thought, well, it's a 1 to 2. Oh, and then when the Federal Reserve came in, oh, by the way, your money decreases at 1 to 2%, plus the taxes are 1 to 2, so it's a negative 4%. Like, people didn't get it. There wasn't social media. Very few people understood the workings of banking, like just the average person can figure it out today. But once these systems are set in place, they're very, very difficult to unseat. And then they become just part of the waking reality, you know, because the power that a lot of institutions have now is more power than probably the church had. Well, I wouldn't say that, but a lot of, let's say, fiefdoms, kingdoms, the czars, etc. These institutions in our government are far more powerful than if you think of some of the czars that were ruling in the late 1800s. I mean, sheesh, it's nothing in comparison to the power they have over the citizenry and what they can take. But I digress. Speaking of serfdom, when I was looking in the paintings across Europe, I was in Italy, and I was trying to find in the museums what were, you know, the signals and signs of a pre-reset and a post-reset. But here's the reason I tell you this is there's very, 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 very little in the 1300s for paintings, or the early 1400s. There's almost nothing. And when I say that, I mean almost zero. But then suddenly fast forward into, like, you know, 1501 or 1520, and the walls are covered in paintings. Like, there is a dropout of history significantly in what we consider the serfdom era, 1400s, 1300s, Dark Ages. But another thing I noticed in that, the earliest of, like, say, the 1495 to 1520 paintings, everything was in perfect condition. And when I say that, like, when they're looking back at the archways, they're perfect, and the cities are perfect, and the ports and the bridges and the walls of the castles and the castles themselves, perfect. But then you get into the late 1500s and the painters, the same exact locations completely destroyed. You got trees growing out of the top of where the archways were. The bridges aren't there anymore. Castle walls looks as if they've been melted, and they're just hillsides, and they're not even walls anymore. But these are the same exact paintings from two different eras of time, just by painters. Remember, back then, the realists. There were no photographs. Photography hadn't been invented. People painted what they saw. So, was it a previous painting that they'd seen, just like previous source maps that had been taken from Coronelli, which is the famous cartographer in Italy? He didn't survey parts of Africa himself. He took source maps and put them all together, like part of the Piri Reis map is on one of his maps. So these painters that could see and demarcate a zone of time, where an era of time, this is in exactly what you're talking about, the serfdom era. Why is there so little left of that time? There had to have been vast amount of, painters. There were vast amounts of castles. And, when you think about what occurred during the time of serfdom, there were kings everywhere. They had private armies. Well, of course, at that time, they would have painters and artisans and those who would paint realist style, because everywhere I did go, with the palaces and families, private residences, or which now are open to the public, that were, just what you consider a palace, was somebody's home in the 1700s and late 1600s, they had oodles of paintings of themselves. Now, why would it be any different in the 14 or 13 or 1200s? Like, where did all that go to? Because it is literally unfindable, at least in the areas I'd gone to, in the private collections, the private homes, the museums, naval museums, and just anywhere in between that I could put my finger in and try to find a private collection somewhere. Even in the books from the 1800s talking about previous, before Rembrandt era paintings, there are almost none on reference. It's really difficult to find. So what was so all-encompassing that wiped out everybody? Yeah, I know there was the Black Plague that came through and everything. But prior to that, there should have been an enormous amount of, artwork done for those of the aristocratic class. So when we look at this wipeout and the change of an age, and the same thing when we move from Aries into Pisces, right around the birth of Christ time, since you mentioned the Romans. Like, another thing, the destruction of the statues, and just incredible amounts of destruction at the time on anything of effigies before into the Aries era, was purposely destroyed. And I look at it and say, okay, it was purposeful destruction, so you forget the old age, and everything from that point is of the new age. Because you saw they just took the Thomas Jefferson statue down in New York City. They removed it out of the park there that had been there for 100 plus years. So now the Thomas Jefferson statue gets taken out of a public viewing area and shoved into a museum, probably melted down like they did with I forget it, was it Lee's statue? And they had that kind of little crazy glowing head there that sort of resembled something from Halloween. You got to break down and destroy the old era to bring in the new era, because if there are vestiges of the old era and the old time, people hold on to those beliefs. They're still rooted in it. So you need to destroy it completely to move people to a new time, a new era, a new system of belief. So as we see this, the destruction across the planet, I don't care if it's the economy, if it's society, if it's religion, or anywhere that we're looking across all nations. The destruction is of the old world, because they can't have you remembering that there was a time prior where common sense ruled. They have to bring us into this completely destroyed era and confuse to reset a new era. And that's the thing that keeps repeating in history again and again and again. So we're in a no different time. But the serfdom era really is very fascinating for me, because I did see quite a few lithographs that always had comets in them, and paintings, and tapestries. Huge amount of comets everywhere. And then also the reference of Nibiru, there was some kind of bird in the sky. Like, the classical reference is I'm just saying if Nibiru was coming in, this planet of the crossing, it would have sort of wings on it, and everywhere you look in these older paintings, they have this thing in the sky that has wings on it, and it is not like an angel. It is very different. It is something like a planetary body with wings on it, like dispersing the clouds. Not an angel, for sure not. Super clean. But what was the time era that this happened? You know, and again, for me, is it source paintings from further afield back in time that they just kept repainting and repainting and repainting, just as source maps from the period Reese map? They just kept passing that Ice Age map down, Ice Age map down. Because I am telling you, absolutely, unequivocally, the globes that are in the Venice Museum of Coronelli, the cartographer, show sea levels 200 feet lower than they are today. The maps don't match. The maps do match on the land masses, but the amount of coastline on these maps does not match today's coastlines. There's far more landmass around what we see today, especially Florida and Taiwan and Japan as a unified landmass. Korean Peninsula nearly connects with Jeju Island. I mean, they're looking at a sea. Who had the technology to map our world when sea levels were 200 feet lower than they are today? That puts us at 7,000 years prior, minimum. You know, Sumerians just popped up at 7,000 years. So you can't, there's a disconnect in history there, but I digress back to the reset. You have to destroy the old to bring in the new. And I'll just leave it there because I know, man, with the end times reporting and this illusion of, I don't know, world that we sit in, it's deliberately unserious. It's deliberately destructive. It's deliberately confusing because you need to scatter the old to bring in the new. I don't know if I'm making sense, Ransom, but I'm going to leave it there. I mean, you know, you turned me on to a few ideas and my head was just running there after you spoke.
Yeah, it's weird, the clown show that they're giving us, too. I mean, think about it. Right now, I've been scrolling through social media, and what they're proposing is that Taylor Swift, a pop icon star, is going to sway the election in one way or the other. It's silly. Everything about it is silly. I mean, we've been living in these made-for-TV events, and I just wonder what the next silly thing will be to keep everybody just in the dumb state of things. And then
wait, Ransom, could I ask it? How is that supposed to be done? I don't follow that kind of news generally. I'm not an entertainment guy. So, I mean, how's one person supposed to sway an election that's a singer? Can you delve into that for me? I don't get it.
Well, she has, you know, tens of millions of followers, you know, equal to the amount of votes that we supposedly get in an election. But on top of that, she has it's like the public debutante. She's supposed to be a Christian, but she doesn't have any of the Christian values. So it's like a weird antagonistic thing for some people. And then, you know, the other people feel more accepted by it. And then she's dating, I don't know if he's the quarterback or some player on the Kansas City Chiefs, which brings in millions and millions of more fans. So what they've been doing is creating a public spectacle of her. There was a whole round of AI nasty art about her last week. They're doing everything they can, obviously, to keep her at the top of the headlines. Like, so you could go to MSNBC, CNN, et cetera, Twitter. Yeah, I know that bugs that guy out there. I say et cetera. But anyway, just everywhere is pushing this Taylor Swift thing. And it's so nonsensical that it makes me want to vomit. And then they're trying to tell you silly ideas like chopping down forests and burying them that will save the planet. We need to cover the sun so it doesn't come down here. Growing your own food is bad. Eating meat is bad. Everything is exactly opposite of what it's supposed to be. And it's hard to get over that fact. So every new little fad or thing that they have makes the conspiracy theorist or even a critical thinker or, you know, people that use deductive logic go, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And when they do it, then they're attacked as a conspiracy theorist. And I think that's part of the formula at this point. And that's what we saw over the last 2 years. They have perfected the tribalism, and I don't want to use this as an example too much, but in every country or empire, a group comes along, whether you find it positive or negative, a group comes along and they all start wearing the same uniform. And there's some kind of psychological effect about that tribalism. So Trump did that. or the Trump campaign, the Make America Great thing. It's a great idea. There's nothing wrong with the concept, the saying, any of that. But the idea that they got half of the population to identify themselves as people that have a certain opinion. That opinion is not liked by the world elite. It is not liked by our own government, as you can see the things that they're doing. So they're dropping these little culture bombs to further micromanage the division between people, so that they get an entire population where half of them doesn't believe the electoral process works at all. The other half believes that it's somehow manufactured. And then you have the people that don't even participate that think, well, it doesn't matter because the uniparty does what it wants. And I'm one of those people. I can't vote either way. I can't act like I'm on a team when I realize that both of them are a facade and fake. Every time they go to Congress or the Senate and they vote on something, you get to see what they really believe. They go down party lines just enough to pass the agendas, and they make it seem like it's an even split just enough to say, well, I'm sorry you have to deal with this new tyranny, but at least half of the people, a little less than half of the people said no. But that's all they did. And then each time it goes around, they get a little more of their agenda pushed. And right now, it's so obvious that they have dissolved our borders in order to cripple the country. There are more people coming in than some of the sizes of big cities in a state. Like, there have been, at least that they're admitting to in the past 2 years, upwards of 20 million people. That's more population than the state I live in. So I don't think people understand what's really going on. There's nobody making stuff. We don't have jobs in the United States. So the only jobs that we have here right now are in the service industry, or building things or selling products that don't come from here. So we have two nightmares coming no matter which part of the uniparty you pick. If you pick the one, they'll continue down the war side and they'll do that. If you pick the other one, we'll have a trade war with China, which will necessarily make all of the products go up, and everybody won't be able to do nothing, which will make our economy stagnant. And then they have rules and regulations on us and put people over here in the Western world in a position where they can't produce. So it's not like if we had a tariff war with China, all of the products would necessarily go up. But it's not like you're going to find an American counterpart that all of a sudden can produce the same products for cheap. It's not going to happen. So it seems like both ends of the supposed conflict of all of these things are working in unison to attack the population, the lower class, the middle class, the peasants, the peons, and the people with no power. Think about when you talk about who has the wealth, we always talk about the 1%. It's not the 1%. It's like 0.00001% of people that actually have substantial wealth enough to change the outcomes of what's going on in countries. And we've seen that with people like George Soros. And he's not the only one. There's a bunch of those players out there. They use their unimaginable fortunes that they built off of cheap goods and cheap labor from the third world and the inherited wealth of the first world. And they use that money to further destroy both parties. So it seems like there's a uniparty worldwide. It's more than it seems like that, because we keep going. Like when you look at the UN and they vote on whether or not to let a country invade another country, it's obviously a joke, because sometimes they'll say this is a crime and other times it's okay. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. And we have three superpowers that always veto the other one. So just like our national legal system and executive branch, judicial branch, and our political system is no longer functioning, the world governing body doesn't function either. It's always at a stalemate. So in order to fix that, they're going to have a worldwide war. Now, whether or not it's just going to be a slow trade war, I don't think so. I think it's going to be a hot war, and a lot of countries are going to disappear off the map, and people have to get used to a new era of human existence with new maps, new rules, and a whole new system. And I think the elite that are there will use anything they possibly can. If World War doesn't give them ultimate power, they will create an enemy that's outside of the planet, one that you would have to pay for eternity and never get to visually see it or participate in it other than a random explosion or attack. And I know we've talked about this many times. Even if they pulled the alien card, I have a hard time. I can't believe it. They could have built that in a lab. I mean, they're already proposing the idea of controlling people with brain trips or people's consciousness becoming a program, and these things are becoming some kind of a reality. Whether or not it's the thing that they say it is still debatable. But what happens when someone dies? But the court recognizes that they've copied their program. See, they already have predictive programming television shows just like this. One of them is called Upload, and the whole idea is that people maintain their wealth and their legacy even after the grave. So think about that. You're having to deal with, say, the Rockefeller family, and you have David Rockefeller making decisions behind the scene, but it's not really him. It's just a program. And, it could be all kinds of weird stuff. A lot of people believe that the jinn or the genie was some kind of piece of technology in the ancient past. And that's one of numerous things that human beings have come across where they've connected to another source of information that directed them to build a certain kind of manufacturing civilization to get to a technological point. And at that point, they would no longer need the massive populations to build it. And I think that's exactly the point in time we're at. They don't need the massive populations for production anymore. We now have the science and technology to use a smaller population and robotics and AI to do the same thing that these third world countries have been doing for the last 50 years, propping up the worldwide economy.
Wow, that's a deep statement. Speaking of maps, I just got a blast here. Those of you in California, total rainfall modeled for the next 10 days is an astounding 6 to 12 inches, Southern California. Coastal higher elevations, 15 inches of rain. So please protect yourself. That one just flashed on the National Weather Center. Because I set up some alerts here, and even while we're talking, this nice little map from Ryan Maue popped up here. This is substantial, and Southern California is going to be bogged down for a minute on this. Like, you can't have that much rain and floods and emergency services not being stretched, and a lot of container ports and roads being affected, this sort of thing. But are we at the gin cycle once again? It's very possible. I look at some of the technology in CERN also. I mean, they show you some of the supercomputers inside CERN, and they are in themselves looking like hive brains, like a hive mind, for a better term. I mean, I look at some of these connected devices in CERN, and it's just absolutely, even just to look at the configuration of it is stunning. But then to know how much information is flowing through it is even more mind-boggling. But here's the next thing. CERN, as wide and as large as it is with a Hadron Collider right now, they want to build something 10 times larger. So they're looking for funding for something 10 times larger. And again, Revolution Radio, thank you for letting us have our conversation tonight. Anybody out there that liked our conversation, please remember to sign up for our newsletter. Well, it's just the show notes. So anything we discussed tonight, if you popped in late to the program, we'll give you a one-page bullet point of 10 different points that we thought were the most pertinent for our show. And also, Revolution Radio letting us speak our mind here. Consider a donation as running costs continue, production costs continue. That's revolution.radio. You can find that donate tab right at the top there. Anything is accepted and appreciated to keep the station on air. But think, nobody's talking about one thing here is, everything's focused on the climate, the cows, your lifestyle, your electricity consumption at your house. I got bulbs here burning right now. My computer's running. But even that construction of the Hadron Collider, at 10 times the size it is now, you know, when they run that thing, it takes the equivalent of an entire mid-sized city to power it when they're doing their experiments. Okay, so that I know they only run it 4 days at a time. They don't keep it on 24/7. But looking at the amount of electricity required to power those experiments, I mean, you know, can we put a CO2 carbon footprint on that? And here I am in Ransom of myself reading headline after headline where all U.S. forces across the Middle East are being mobilized right now. All of them in unison. Air Force people are being called back to duty right now, if you didn't know that. They're talking about conscription in the United Kingdom, meaning the draft. So we have all these military land, sea, and air vehicles, vessels, Humvees, whatever you want to call it, tracks, tanks, anything. Is anybody doing a CO2 assessment on how much CO2 is coming out of all this military operation? And again, has anybody done CO2 assessments on all the container ships around the planet burning their bunker fuels, which would obviously release pollution as well as gas? I mean, is anybody doing an assessment on this, or is it only focused on the little guy? Because I am sure if we started to put, you know, numbers down to these things, from HARP to CERN to the war machine globally ramping up right now, how much do you think Stratotankers cost, or how much do you think they push out? Dozens of them. 1,000 tanks running on diesel. How much CO2 do you think 1,000 tanks running around the deserts are pushing out? How about the F-18 Hornets? What about those? How much do you think CO2 they're burning through? What about a carrier group? Do you think they're emission free? I don't think so. I think what needs to be done is a spreadsheet on military emissions. But that will get us into the nasty camp, the nasty category for bringing up such a thing. It seems like there's a void, there's a gap, a firewall between true emissions and truly a lot of the driver of emissions, from the factories to the distribution system. You might call that logistics. The regular workings of these Fortune 500 companies that are out of the side of their mouth saying you need to reduce it, we need to reduce it, everybody got to reduce it, but they're still producing huge amounts of CO2 in their production, and the full chain, upstream, downstream, both don't care. To the military, to private science. Like, once you add all that up, I bet that's more than half of all the emissions on the planet. Yet you're required to have an LED bulb in your house. You know, it just gets kind of into the absurd, into, you know, clown world again and again when they start to point fingers at different things. And the Michael Mann lawsuit, again, Mark Stein was sued by Michael Mann, if anybody didn't know. Mark Stein, also a political commentator. He'd done Tucker a few times. He has his own show over in the UK. Was sued by Michael Mann, the hockey stick guy. So Mark Stein was like, your hockey stick is bogus, and was coming at him with true science and all these different charts of how they cooled the past and ClimateGate to, you know, make it as a linear trend upward. But then it came out in the court documents that Michael Mann didn't know, even though he was responsible for funding all these people, he didn't know why they got funded or where they got funded. And he didn't understand himself how he got funded and how he got $9 million worth of grants. So Mark Stein, they're going to remove the case for dismissal here because Michael Mann's bizarre testimony, you know, he's the one who said, no, I can't show you my research, even though it was publicly funded, public, you know, university research, that he said, no, it's proprietary. I can't show you that. So this whole thing about the climate debate itself, and now the World Economic Forum really, you know, jumping on this thing, talking about things are changing so quickly, and, you know, the climate debate jumping in and out of this, it just makes no sense any longer. It's kind of, there's really, the evidence behind it shows, again, this is nothing more than destroying the past, creating a new future. And again, you know, everywhere I look, every dot seems to be a destruction dot. The new glimpses of the future are mirages. They haven't manifested yet, but for sure the destruction's taking place. And eventually, if you destroy everything, you'll have nowhere to live. So where will you go? You'll go somewhere where there's something, because having nothing or having something is better than having nothing. So people are going to gravitate toward the new reality and manifest it, because if there's no vestige of the old world, that it's all been completely destroyed and there's nowhere to hang your hat on a belief system any longer, people are going to gravitate to where there is something already solidified. I don't know. It gets really bizarro, because that jinn, the talk of the jinn, Ransom, you've hit on that before, and I really believe we're at that crux again, where we're in the middle of two worlds at the moment, celestially, energetically, but then also on the societal plane and in the economic plane too. But I think these two worlds are starting to become less intertwined, where people can see the breaks and the rips and the tears in time space now, and make sense that it's something's different.
You know, it kind of makes you wonder if there's going to be an event where everybody, you know, like governments, whatnot, they all climb into their bunkers. And then in about 500 years, they all crawl out and they, you know, spread out from their bunkers and make little villages and things. And then eventually the bunkers are forgotten about. And everybody has this story about how they climbed out of inner earth and, you know, walked around. Does that sound familiar? Because that, you know, we've talked about that a lot of times too. That's a scenario that people talk about what happened in the past, because it seems like that exact thing happened. But can it happen again? Is that what's happening right now? On the other end of it, on the other end of the reset, who's going to be there to tell the story about what happened if most of the population is gone and all of the information has been eradicated? And there's just so many scenarios, least of which are just the plans and plots of man, or you know how they say all plans of the mice and men go awry, or something like that. I would think that would be the same thing with all these planners planning, the Bill Gates of the world, the seed vaults. What happens when 2 or 3 of them, you know, don't work out for them? You can imagine a world that they messed up and then they're stuck in because they got rid of all the inventors, all of the producers, and the variations of people. And it's obvious to anyone that studies the topic that the earth is plenty big for the people not only on it right now, but for the suggested amount of people in the near future. So why do they want to reduce it so much? The only thing I can think of, the main goal of that would be to actually reset the information and belief systems, which circles back to the Albert Pike thing, because that's exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about using all of the institutions that are active now to destroy each other, and then bring in the people that don't believe in anything and destroy them too after they destroy the other ones. And then they will be at the top of the pyramid like the AI god or whatever it is that they're wanting to create, where they get to, you know, be the cabbage that tells the horse how it works. And I think that's exact. I mean, I don't see any other scenario with all of the puzzles and pieces out there. It's obvious that they have some kind of great plan to destroy everything. And judging by history, they're really good at destroying and resetting things when they are ready and they pull the trigger. The thing is what is it that tells them which time to do what? And I know a lot of people are into the gematria and other things like that. And there is a lot of truth to the esoteric stuff. They wait for specific times. They wait for like alignments, different things like that. And, you know, if you're just some guy that's out there and you're looking at this weird alignment of the planets at a specific time, you can bet that people that have more information about things also are paying attention to those things and also find them important. Everywhere you look at all the secret schools and secret organizations, one of the main themes they have is the worship of sacred geometry. So what happens when the cycle goes around to a specific point where they're waiting for a geometric shape to happen to mark what they want to do? And I think it has a lot to do with not just the Jacobin stuff, but if you heard Aleister Crowley talk, they have a whole idea of a new era of mankind. But before they get that, they have to cover the world in blood and reset it. So it doesn't matter which group you pick. You can get into all these esoteric circles. When you get down to the bottom line and the plan or the prophecy for the future, it's about utter and complete destruction and then renewal. And I put to you that that's the entire message. Really, the basic one from esoteric knowledge is the death and rebirth. Without the death and rebirth, these people believe they can't attain power or grow in any kind of spiritual way. And if they are trying to grow in a spiritual way, it makes you wonder what kind of spirit. Obviously, we don't want to be that kind of spirit. And it gets into these things that people are talking about today, interdimensional beings, etc., demons. You can call it what you want. If, in fact, that's a reality, and if, in fact, they can manipulate this plane of things that we're at, it would explain a lot of behaviors from not only the elite, but everyday people that lose their mind on the street. When you walk down the street, even in my small town, if you went back to the dark ages, you would be convinced that half the people walking down the street were possessed by demons. I mean, I don't know what you would call it. Of course, it comes in different forms. It comes from, propaganda leading to mental problems, and people have mental issues. There's chemical imbalances. There's drug addiction. However you want to put it, they are possessed by something, and it is a sign of the times.
They might be waiting for an electromagnetic configuration in the solar system as well. Whatever it is, this timeline, we're at it, and they understand it cosmically, energetically, celestially, electromagnetically, to energize their sacred spots and use that energy against humanity. Like I said, invasive hominid species. We'll see you next week. David DuByne, Ransom Godwin signing off.